what's the point of 6.8 Western or 6.5 Creedmoor or any of the PRCs when we have 300 Weatherbys and 338 Lapuas? Are we just reinventing the wheel? Howdy folks, and welcome back to Rough Shot Outdoors. Today I just kind of want to explain a little bit about these new modern high BC cartridges that really started taking off with the 6.5 Creedmoor. Now when they first hit the scene, a lot of traditionalists, myself included, were like, this is a joke. We've already got the 30-06, we've got the 338 Win Mag, we've got the 375 Holland. We also have the 375 Ruger, which I think is just as good, if not better. What do we need all this stuff for? And I used to be against using anything smaller than 30 caliber for deer. For my first experience with any of kind of the new whiz bang stuff was actually a 300 PRC. It was a hunting client up in Alaska. He had a 300 PRC. He was a caribou hunter, and he took a caribou at 120 yards. Nice old bull caribou. If I can figure out, I'm going to try to figure out how to put that picture on here when I edit this. So if it shows up, it means I figured it out. But anyway, so I'm going to stop it right here. Okay, so if I was able to figure out how to add that picture of that caribou. Anyway, it was about 125 yards. I was actually over the hill with the horses. I heard the shot. The outfitter I worked for was with the client. When they got back, they told me about, well, actually the other client was actually coming back towards me, and a bunch of bulls, caribou, come over the top of the mountain, and he shot one straight on, dropped it. I can't remember how far away he said it was. That was a 280 Ackley improved that he had when he dropped it. But now the 280 Ackley improved really isn't that a modern whiz bang, but a lot of guys sure like it. But back to the 300 PRC, I was asking Brent about it, and I said, he's like, I really didn't think it was that impressive. Brent shot a 300 Weatherby. And the client, he's like, yeah, you could have shot it with your 444 Marlin. It was that close. So I was kind of like, well, maybe, this is just a big hype. Not really something that I was interested in. They're just trying to sell guns, which that's, and a lot of people were that way too. And if you go back far enough, if you think about when self-contained cartridges first, let's even go back even further, when the cap lock or percussion ignition system came into being in the 1830s. there was a lot of old timers that are like, I don't need that fancy new stuff. We've been using flintlock for 200 years. And the mountain men out west continued to use flintlock well into the 1840s. And that has been documented from the amount of gun flints that they sold at the rendezvous. It is documented flintlocks were still in use, at least by the South, in the Civil War, which is really amazing because that's when self-contained cartridges were starting to hit the scene. Now, if you think about it too, when the self-contained cartridge first came out, there was people that were like, we've used loose powder and ball for hundreds of years. We don't need self-contained cartridges. And eventually they came around. They started going with the self-contained cartridges. Well, then smokeless powder hits the scene. And a very good example of this, when the 30-30 Winchester came out, a lot of people were like, that's only good for coyotes. That's way too small for deer. You got to have like 45-70 or 38-55. The 32-40 was the 38-55 and 32-40 were actually the first two cartridges chambered in the 1894 Winchester. The 30-30 came out in 1895. And another way to kind of see how that went, people were, the idea at the time was you needed big, heavy bullets, which still holds merit, I will say. But they didn't think the 30-30 was any good. So a few years into that, I'm not exactly sure, 1904, 1902 maybe. It could be later. The 32 Special came out, which was basically the 30-30 necked up to 32 caliber, and that was actually originally loaded with black powder. So it was kind of like the 30-30 for the black powder fans. And another way to kind of look at the 1894 really started taking off more in the 19 teens, but the 1895 never really took off like the 94 did. Eventually, people came around, the 30-30 was working great, and shoot clear up into the 40s, 50s, early 60s, the 30-30 was the king of the deer woods. So that brings me to where we are today with the modern high BC cartridges. Obviously started with the 6.5 Creedmoor. The PRCs came out. Well, the Creedmoor came out in 2008, but it wasn't really designed as a hunting cartridge. It was a target cartridge. But eventually guys started using them for deer hunting, and they said it just worked great. And then there was naysayers, old timers, myself included. I'm not that old, but that's too small. I don't know what, why would you use that? And, so they, I guess I couldn't, 2015, 16 maybe. Might have been later than that when the PRCs started hitting the scene. Anyway, so the whole new idea, the long, heavy bullets, heavy 4 caliber, long, high BC, boat tail, with a long ogive. This was all just didn't quite make sense to me. What's wrong, with the 338 Win Mag for anything bigger than a deer? It's got a lot of recoil. But the more I started, working for an outfitter and hearing clients talk about these new cartridges, and it was kind of like, well, this might be something interesting. So I went and got a 6.8 Western. And I have only taken one animal with it. It was a white-tailed buck at 250 yards. And I think I've told this story before, but if you haven't heard it, he was quartering towards me strongly. And when I am deer hunting, I tend to throw up the rifle. I see antlers, I shoot. I go into, I don't know if it's adrenaline, but I just laser focus, and he was strongly quartering. I torched off the shot. He was in real tall slough grass. Didn't see him after, I got back where I could see through the scope. Well, I went down there, and there he was, 5 yards from where I shot, deader than a doornail. And I got to looking at him. I thought, geez, did I gut shoot him? I barely clipped a rib on the side that I shot, and it did come out right in front of his hip. So I got to thinking, boy, that hit pretty hard. That was with 165 grain Nosler AccuBond out of the 6.8 Western. So I was starting to think, boy, there might be some merit to this. I had a cousin and uncle that were shooting 6.5 Creedmoors. I don't know the bullets they were using, but they said that the deer went right down. There was actually 2 deer in camp that year taking the 6.5s. And this is well into the 6.5 popularity. I talked to a deckhand for the charter fishing company I used to work for out of Sitka. I talked to a deckhand just a couple weeks ago. He was back for a couple weeks, and then he was going to go back up to Sitka. But, he's down in the lower 48 for a couple weeks. But anyway, we were talking at a restaurant, and he was talking about taking a mule deer buck out in Utah with the 7 PRC. I guess I can't remember all the details, but it kind of sounded like he shot him in the neck, dead straight on. Now, just about anything, if you take that shot, it's gonna work. But now that all of this is starting to, okay, this is working, but again, are we just reinventing the wheel? The 300 PRC, for example, has less case capacity than the 300 Weatherby. So, in conventional thinking, how could the 300 PRC hit harder than the 300 Weatherby? Well, the best way I can describe how these higher BC now that might, I could be wrong. The 300 Weatherby I don't think is outperforming the 300 PRC out to shoot probably 600 yards. I'd have to look into that, but a better comparison, I guess, would be the 6.8 Western versus the 300 Win Mag. A lot of people say that the 300 or the 6.8 hits like a 300 Win Mag. I've never hunted with a 300 Win Mag. I knew a person up in Alaska, a gal that shot a moose with one. But I guess I don't really know I didn't quite get the story of how it performed. But if you think about, obviously, the 6.8 is a short action. 300 Win Mag is a standard length action. 30-06 length. Not long action. Long action would be 375 H&H length, Magnum length. But there's less, allegedly, there is less felt recoil from the 6.8 Western, burns less powder, and is a lighter bullet. Now, in conventional thinking, how is that possible? How can that hit, how can the 6.8 hit like a 300 Win mag when it doesn't add up? Well, the best way I can describe it would be like comparing a Warhammer to a Katana. They both do the same thing, but the Katana is a lot more efficient. The Katana is a lot lighter, a lot sharper. Yes, you can kill with a Warhammer, and you're probably going to be bigger, stronger, brawnier than the guy swinging a katana, a samurai sword. If you don't know what the proper term would be for that. But that's just the way I think of it. Yeah, swinging a katana, maybe not quite as manly as a big old Warhammer battle axe, but it's a lot more efficient. I'm probably going to get some hate for this, but that's kind of where, and once you start using these new cartridges, and yes, it does affect the 6.8 Western kicks harder than a 30-06, which, but even the 6.8 Western, it's got some bite, and if it kicks more than a 30-06, it's not like a wimpy cartridge, that's for sure, as far as recoil goes. The 6.5, I've never even shot a 6.5, so, but it just falls into the same category of the highly efficient cartridges. So, that's what I got for the idea behind these new cartridges. Once you start using them, and once you really start diving into the idea of using more efficient cartridges, there's nothing wrong with using a Warhammer or a battle axe, but once you start using the Katana, you appreciate it more. So that's what I got for you today. I'm Pete Refshaw with Refshaw Outdoors. Keep your powder dry.